Thursday, October 31st. The city streets are crowded for the holiday.
2022's The Batman is, in my opinion, one of the more interesting Batman films ever made. I mean, I personally really like it just because of how, I don't know, cool Batman feels in that story and in that movie. But I also find that it's a lot different from other Batman films in two major ways. The first one being that it's a lot darker. I mean, even compared to the Christopher Nolan films, the Batman has a much grimier, darker, grittier tone to it. And even, for example, I think the way the colors are shown in the film, it just doesn't feel as light. And I also think it's a lot different from other Batman movies because of its focus on mystery. In this film, we really get to see Batman as a detective. It's something that we don't really see him as much of as in other Batman films. And I'm really glad that they took a focus on him being a detective in this film because, to be honest, I think it's one of the most underrated parts of Batman's character. We always see him as the crime fighter or, the billionaire orphan, but as a detective, we don't really get to see a ton of cool mystery moments. And thankfully, I think the Batman actually delivered on that end because that film was really one big mystery as Batman tries to uncover who the Riddler is and where he will strike next. Of course, trying to figure out the Riddler's riddles as well. And I like that in the process of having this more detective focused Batman, they don't really make him perfect. He messes up, he struggles, he doesn't always have the answers. And I think it's something that, I'd like to see in more Batman media in the future. A focus on an imperfect Batman detective. He is the Dark Knight detective, but so often we don't really see that detective side of him. But if you trace back some of the inspiration for 2022's The Batman, you will see that one of its biggest sources of inspiration is actually a comic called Batman The Long Halloween. And in my opinion, this comic contains Batman's greatest mystery, which is what we're going to talk about today. Before I really get into the great mystery which I've mapped out and tried to solve, I just want to talk about what makes this comic so great. So, I haven't really read a ton of Batman comics, or really a ton of comics in general, but from what I have read, The Long Halloween is probably my favorite comic I've read so far. Um, it's written by Jeff Loeb and illustrated by Tim Sale, and in my opinion, it's so well done for a variety of reasons. I guess we can start with Tim Sale's illustrations. I don't really know how to describe it very well, other than it almost seems like on some pages he has like a doodly art style. I'm trying to flip through and see if I can find anything to show you. But in some pages, it almost seems like he's doodling, and yet he has very simple drawings, which are at the same time pretty complex, is the best way I can describe it. He has a lot of lines that I think can could be kind of removed and you could still have the same essence of the image, but a lot of times I think those same lines which are used add a lot of character. Um, hmm, Maybe, I don't know if the camera will pick this up correctly, but for example, I really like just flipping through this illustration. There's a lot of interesting line work going on that I think, didn't have to all be there, but the fact that it is really nice. And Jeff Loeb, in my opinion, really helped create a great mystery within this story. Now, obviously, I am going to talk about major plot points. If you've never read The Long Halloween and you're even just slightly interested in it or want to read a Batman comic, I would highly recommend that you go read this and then watch this video because this is genuinely a great dare I say, piece of literature that's worth reading. I think it's that good. Um, but I guess a little quick synopsis. Batman Jim Gordon and District Attorney Harvey Dent essentially are trying to figure out who this serial killer named Holiday is, and this Holiday killer strikes first on Halloween night and then continues to kill people on every major holiday for about a year. And what we see is this really cool, I love this because I feel like we don't see this enough. We see this really cool kind of combination and intertwinement of different villainous groups where you have like the top of the top, you know, people like the Joker, the Riddler, kind of mixing with the lower level but still influential crime families of Gotham, who aren't really arch criminals or whatever, but they are still very powerful and have influence over Gotham City. The two main ones in this story being the Falcone family and the Maroni family. And what we see is that Holiday mainly targets the Falcone family, but then near the end of their killing sprees, they end up also killing one of the Maroni family members and also a random civilian coroner. And the whole mystery is, who is Holiday? And that is what I have attempted to kind of visualize. I have my own theory. The thing about this mystery, though, is that it's so ambiguous, and that's what I think makes it such a great mystery. We don't actually know who Holiday is. As far as I'm concerned, there's no real official answer, and even if you try searching the answer to that question up, you will quite literally just find people giving their opinions, and there are so many different ones of that. It's honestly impressive. You will see people give two completely different answers as to who the Holiday killer might be. But I have my own theories, and still a lot of open-ended points and moments in this. I guess we should just get right into it. Now, I might not be like fully on camera for all of this because it's hard to fit me and the board in the screen. But really what I want you guys to be seeing is mainly the board. So I prepared this with, I think, some of the major pieces of evidence that can help us solve the mystery of who the Holiday killer really is. Okay, now, I guess another piece of context. Harvey Dent in this story, if you don't know who Harvey Dent is, he becomes the iconic Two-Face villain that we see in countless Batman stories. Harvey Dent was originally a district attorney, and within the story, we see him essentially lose faith in the justice system. After working so long on trying to catch the Holiday killer, he gets acid thrown in his face during a trial and essentially decides to take justice into his own hands, doing whatever it takes to stop the Holiday killings. Okay, so now that you have that piece of context, I'm also going to not try to explain the whole story, but here we go. I think the biggest real piece of evidence, the largest thing that we have to help us decipher who the Holiday killer really is this middle illustration right here. Now, it's probably pretty hard to see all the text of every panel that I've put up here on camera, so I'll read it out to you. Essentially, this middle illustration is Two-Face saying, "You both know, don't you? There were two Holiday killers." Okay, and then we have Batman and Jim Gordon down here saying, "What? There were two Holiday killers." Now, this takes place at the end of the story, once Two-Face has killed actually two major characters. One of them is a rat for the crime families. His name is Vernon. And the other one is the leader of the Falcone family, the head of the Falcone family, who is kind of goes by the nickname the Roman. The Roman Falcone. Two-Face kills both of them. And before he gets kind of, put away by Jim Gordon and Batman, he says, there were actually two Holiday killers. So, I believe we can actually trust Two-Face in this statement because there would be no reason to lie. His whole pursuit throughout the story, even when he becomes Two-Face, is to stop the Holiday killings, and even though by the end of it, he realizes that he himself is now a villain and he is kind of done wrong, he still ultimately wanted to stop the holiday killings. There were two holiday killers, which is kind of the opposite of what Batman and Jim Gordon kind of expected. If there's two holiday killers, Batman kind of categorizes Harvey Dent as one of them. In this top illustration here, this happens a year after the first holiday killing. So a year has passed, and on Halloween night of, I guess, the second year of Holiday's terror, Batman says that tonight was Halloween. Harvey Dent killed the Roman with a 22, the last holiday murder. In the end, Harvey Dent was Holiday too. Essentially, Batman says whether or not Harvey Dent was actually one of the two holiday killers, he also ended up becoming one anyways. He could kind of be classified as a third one, regardless of if he was actually one of the two original killers, because he ended up killing two people on a holiday. Remember, Falcone and Vernon were both killed by Dent. Okay. And he says something very important. Harvey Dent killed a Roman with a 22. So a 22 is the firearm that the holiday killer uses kind of as their calling card. They leave one behind at the scene of every murder alongside some sort of item that signifies the holiday. So for St. Patrick's Day, it was a figure of a leprechaun. For Halloween, it was a jack-o'-lantern. For, I believe, Christmas, it was a snow globe. But they always also leave a 22 pistol behind. And that's also important. Now, earlier in the story, we also see Batman go to, in my opinion, one of the coolest DC villains, one of the most mysterious. I really don't know a whole lot about him. I really only know him from Batman Arkham City, but I really thought he was interesting and cool in that game, and that is Calendar Man. Now, Calendar Man is actually pretty similar to Holiday, except he's in jail. Calendar Man does very similar things where he commits crimes, I believe, on holidays as well. But in this instance, Calendar Man is not the holiday killer because he's been in prison the whole time. However, Batman goes to Calendar Man and essentially asks him for, any input, any advice as to who the holiday killer might be. And I'll read this to you. So Calendar Man says tomorrow is the big day. She'll be killing again. Batman is like, okay, what makes you think it's a woman? And then Calendar Man says, because he likes it, the attention. No one knows who she is, and already he has made a name for himself or herself. So this is pretty ambiguous. And in this point in the story, the reader is meant to assume that there's really only one holiday killer. So the fact that the Calendar Man keeps saying he or she, I think at the time that the reader is meant to be reading this, it's really meant to be like a question of, okay, well, there's probably only one killer. Is it a male or a female? But once you finish the story and you go back and you see this, you'll realize that I think Calendar Man is actually talking about two different people. He's talking about a male killer and a female killer. And he makes it very clear that no one knows who she is, which means that this female killer isn't very well known. She's not like a popular person. And yet he also says already he has made a name for himself or herself. I guess at this point I should really introduce the three major suspects. But before I do that, I will bring out another piece of evidence. On April Fool's Day, the Riddler tries to figure out who the holiday killer is. And it's in this panel. He's kind of the one talking here. This is not a real illustration, but this is what he believes to be Catwoman. And this is in his mind, basically. He believes that Catwoman could maybe have been the killer. But he says, let's be more practical. These 22 pistols are lightweight, easy on the hand, perfect for a woman. So even the Riddler, and I wouldn't put it past him, like that's actually not a bad idea. The Riddler is supposed to be this incredibly smart, witty person, but he is kind of a genius. And this thought that maybe the holiday killer is a woman, I don't think that's wrong. I think there's three main suspects, and one of them is kind of like a blatant, like, yes, I think this definitely happened. Okay. Here, you can see her face. This right here is Gilda Dent. This is Harvey Dent's wife. Okay, but we're not gonna look at this panel just yet. We're gonna go up here. So this is right at the end of the story. Two-Face has been put in prison. Basically, everything is done. What happens here, she says in this part, she's throwing some stuff into a fire. She says, I used your hat and coat for a disguise and left those things at the killings. Then she says, Johnny VT was the first. Then again, on Thanksgiving, I left the hospital while you slept. And again, on Christmas. Right now, she's talking kind of to Harvey Dent, although Harvey Dent's not actually there because he's in prison. But this is his wife basically talking to him in a sense. In this panel, she is throwing away a .22 handgun, the same one that the killer always used.
Then she says, but when Alberto Falcone was shot on New Year's and you came home late that night, your hair was wet, even though you were wearing a hat. A hat. She then says, I found the gun in the basement. You told me it was evidence. And this is that piece of story that we'll get to in a second. She says, I found the gun in the basement. You told me it was evidence, but I knew. You had the same idea as me. You picked up where I left off, so we could have time together. A child, a secret. So, let's go back to what she says earlier. She says Johnny VT was the first. Then again, Johnny VT was the first person that was killed. Then again, on Thanksgiving, I left the hospital while you slept, and again on Christmas. So, essentially, Gilda Dent is confessing to being the original holiday killer. She committed the first 3 of the killings, and I personally believe that to be the case. There's actually an earlier scene where she finds one of the guns in the basement of their house. She says, it's one of those guns, isn't it? Like the killer in the newspapers, Holiday. And she's like, why do you have that, Harvey? That's a little bit suspicious. You know, are you hiding something from me? In this panel, when she says, I found the gun in the basement, you told me it was evidence. This is that part of the story where she says, it's one of those guns, isn't it? Like the killer in the newspapers, Holiday. So this is when she finds apparently a .22 handgun in the basement of their house, and she's wondering if Harvey's hiding anything, if maybe Harvey is the killer. But here's the thing, we know for certain that Gilda Dent, in my opinion at least, it's very, very much the case that Gilda Dent was the original Holiday killer and committed the first 3 crimes. Okay, I mean, we only know that she committed the first 3 because she thinks that Harvey Dent was the other Holiday killer, right? She sees the gun in the basement and believes that, you know, perhaps Harvey is continuing the killings. She thinks that Harvey Dent continued the rest of the killings after her first 3 because Harvey's hair was wet on New Year's, and Alberto Falcone, who was killed on New Year's, was killed on, I believe, a yacht. And after that, after she believes Harvey Dent killed Alberto, she then believes that that Harvey committed the rest of the murders to kind of pick up where she left off, so that they could have more time together as a family, because Harvey Dent was so overworked with this case and just crime in general. Now, Gilda Dent is wrong in this idea that Harvey did the rest of the killings. And here's why. Alberto Falcone did not die on, New Year's at all. Later in the story, after his supposed death, he shows up and kills the head of the Maroney family. This is Alberto Falcone, and he says, I am Holiday. Now, essentially what happens, and I guess for context, this is the Roman's son. The head of the Falcone's family's son is Alberto Falcone. Now, Alberto Falcone says that his excuse for becoming the Holiday killer, he essentially claims to be the Holiday killer who did all of the killings. He says he's responsible for all of them. And he says he wants to do this because he wanted to become something bigger than even his dad, right? He always felt like the forgotten son. I believe the book even says that near the beginning when we first see Alberto. He kind of is like the quiet son, but he's also kind of the forgotten one. And he wanted to really prove himself and do so by becoming such a big sensation that would even outgrow the legacy of his father. But I personally don't believe that Alberto Falcone killed every single victim of the Holiday murderer, because it doesn't really make sense for him to have essentially faked his death, right? Since he was believed to have been killed on New Year's by the Holiday murderer, and then he ends up becoming the Holiday killer. I guess it could sort of erase suspicion, but of him being the killer in the first place, because he's supposed to be dead. But no one would have suspected him in the first place, in my opinion. So it just doesn't make sense. Plus, we have two people who I think are pretty reliable sources here who believe that there was, maybe a female killer, and Dent knows that there were two Holiday killers. So Alberto Falcone claiming that he was the only Holiday killer doesn't make sense. We also have some speculation that perhaps, Dent was one of the major Holiday killers. Batman believes that, regardless of whether or not he was one of the two main Holiday killers, he kind of became one, an extra third honorary one, by killing people on the Halloween of the next year. Gilda also believes that Dent was one of the Holiday killers, but I personally don't believe that this is the case. And in my opinion, that's because Dent doesn't really show himself to be someone capable of doing such a thing, of, doing whatever it takes to bring justice to Gotham City, until the very end, until, he snaps and becomes Two-Face and loses faith in the justice system and decides, okay, it's time to take things into my own hands. If Gotham City cannot catch the Holiday killer, I will myself. I personally don't believe that Dent killed anyone in this story besides the Roman and Vernon at the end, separately from the Holiday killers. Okay. Now, I included this panel down here because I think there is kind of some idea of well, perhaps he could have actually been one of the killers. Because he says, and this is right at the beginning when Johnny Vitti, who I believe Gilda Dent killed, he says this about Johnny Vitti. He says, 2 shots to the head. You ask me, it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. He's like, yeah, it's honestly a good thing that Johnny Vitti died, right? He's kind of okay with that happening, right? And regardless of whether or not Johnny Vitti was a good person, you as a district attorney probably should not be saying that and probably should not feel that way, correct? So perhaps there is this idea of maybe Dent, all along was one of the Holiday killers. But again, in my personal opinion, I don't think he was. But then it also raises the question of, how did he know there were two? If he was not one of the two, how did he know that? How could he have known that there were two Holiday killers? And I guess at this point, we've kind of figured it out. We know that there were two Holiday killers, and I believe because Dent doesn't really solidly prove himself to be like this big criminal and arch criminal or dangerous person until the very end. I guess there is this also one other exception from the two that I've named. Basically every single time the Holiday killer strikes, immediately after the killings happen, we see kind of this transition to just Harvey doing something. It kind of almost subtly implicates him as being one of the killers, because the killing happens and then boom, Harvey Dent is returning home. Harvey Dent is going somewhere. It's very suspicious. So in that sense, maybe Harvey Dent is the killer. But in my opinion, he's not.
I mean, I could just keep going on and on about all the different details, and that's something that I think makes the story so good, is there's so many tiny details that we can talk about in order to determine who the killer might really be. But like I said, I think there's really two killers. And the first one, I believe, has to be Gilda Dent, because Harvey Dent did not seem morally in such a terrible place to have committed those crimes. And I also believe that Alberto Falcone did not really think to do these serial killings. He rather saw that they were happening and at one point decided to kind of profit upon them in order to make his reputation greater and his name bigger. How exactly is that possible if Harvey Dent, he says there were two holiday killers? How would he know? If he wasn't one of the two, how would he know? Well, I think we can immediately cross off Harvey Dent knowing that Alberto Falcone was one of the killers. Part of, Dent's whole career was figuring out who the holiday killer was. And so throughout his, whole investigation and time trying to catch this killer, I think he eventually came to the realization that there were two. He might not have, directly known who the killers were, but I think by the time he became Two-Face, Two-Face very much, at least in this story, is kind of like obsessed with the number two. Obviously, because he has two faces, he shoots Falcone with a 22, the heads or tails, two sides of the coin. I think he genuinely realized that maybe there are actually two killers. But I think there's another thing to this. So by the end of the story, we see Gilda Dent, right, burning some evidence from her time as Holiday. She starts throwing some stuff in the fire, and she throws away a 22 handgun, the same one that the Holiday killer used and the same one that she used for her first 3 killings. My belief is that, look, while perhaps Harvey Dent brought one of the 22 handguns home as actual evidence, I believe Harvey Dent actually possibly did find another 22 in his home that he obviously did not, it was not his because he wasn't the killer. And of course that means it had to have been Gilda's, which made him realize that perhaps Gilda Dent was the Holiday killer. And we know that, a 22 with filed off serial numbers is actually found in the Dent household because Batman informs, I believe, Gilda Dent about it. I believe that was Gilda Dent's 22, and Harvey Dent might have found that one. I think he could piece together that she probably didn't commit every single murder. There's still so many things I don't understand. And I think that's what makes this such a great mystery. It's the fact that there's so many different possible answers. There's so many different ways this case can be viewed. Look, mine might not be right. If you've ever read the story or if you're familiar with it, I would love to hear, what you have to say. There's still so many ambiguous things. The fact that there's not really even like a true definite answer as far as I know, I think that's honestly kind of insane, but also really cool because it just makes the mystery that much greater. So now let's say we have Dent and Gilda as the killers. In my opinion, such a case wouldn't really happen because if Dent was one of the Holiday killers, I think it would completely ruin his transformation, completely just ignore the importance of his transformation into Two-Face, because it's one of the big moments of this story, and I think it's so well told and illustrated as well, very beautifully illustrated, how he becomes Two-Face, that it's a just not only a visual shift in his character, but a general like personality change. That moment when he becomes Two-Face, when the acid hits his face and he knows that his life has changed forever, is really the moment that he no longer kind of believes in justice attained through the, I guess, normal means of like court and things like that, and he will now go on his own killing sprees to deliver justice. If he was truly Holiday, then I think his transformation into Two-Face would just be dumb. I think it honestly would. And I also think certain people, like, I don't know, the Roman, would be dead a lot quicker in this story. So that's just my opinion. You could also have the stance that maybe Alberto was the only killer, that like he claims to be. There's just too many pieces of evidence to point against that. Calendar Man's idea the Riddler's idea. The fact that Two-Face says that there were two holiday killers, and the fact that Gilda literally says she committed 3 of the first killings, it just doesn't make much sense that Alberto was the only killer. So in my opinion, the most sensible idea is that Gilda and Alberto both were the holiday killers. Harvey became I guess we could call it a third holiday killer. Not one that was actually trying to become part of the legend of Holiday, but one who just ended up killing 2 people on Halloween.
Hey guys, I'm filming this actually after I had originally finished the video, and it dawned on me that there was another pretty good piece of evidence that I think supports my theory that Gilda and Alberto were the 2 killers. So specifically, this is for Alberto. One of the holiday killer's last victims was the Gotham City coroner, who would of course have essentially records of everyone's deaths. And out of the 3 suspects, the only one who faked their death was Alberto Falcone. Gilda Dent and Harvey Dent really would have no reason to target the coroner. And clearly, because Alberto wanted to fake his death and keep it a secret and make sure that nobody knew that he was still alive, he wanted to get rid of anyone who could kind of contest that idea, such as the coroner. And so he decided to kill the coroner. I mean, clearly, Gilda and Harvey had no reason to do that. So I think it's just a really good, strong piece of evidence that suggests that Alberto Falcone was one of the holiday killers, because who else would have killed the coroner?
But again, there are still some questions left unanswered. There's quite a bit, like I said before, quite a bit of ambiguity. And that's what I love about the story. It's so open-ended. So many cool theories have been made. I would highly recommend like just searching up like who was the holiday killer and like reading what people have as their opinions and their theories, because some people go even more in depth with the details that I provided. But yeah, I mean, there's so much I could say about how great this book is. I love the use of shadows. I mean, like even from some of these illustrations, you can see there's very bold use of shadows. I mean, I know I printed all this in black and white, but throughout the illustrations and stuff, there is great use of shadows, and I love that because a lot of times it allows for you to kind of fill in the blanks of like what should be there, which is a really great way to not draw as much. And if it's done well, I think it's pretty cool. But the shadow usage, I think, is also kind of adds to that sense of mystery. You know, shadows are mysterious. There's something lurking there. It's kind of like uncertain as to what's in the shadows. And I really like that. It adds that theme of mystery in the story. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, I like how there's different levels of crime kind of interacting with each other. There's even this really cool illustration that spreads across, I believe, 2 pages near the end, where all of the villains involved in the story, who are really almost kind of like side characters for the most part, all of the villains come together in this great illustration that's so epic. And we even see Two-Face in there. It's just so good. I'll throw a picture of it up somewhere if I haven't already. That's my take on Batman's, what is my opinion, Batman's greatest mystery. I had a lot of fun making this video just because I actually tried recording this like a week ago, and it became a little too like summarization of the whole story. It was getting too complicated, and this video will probably also end up being too long. But I just thought it would be cool. Like, what if I kind of like did the cool detective stuff that like Batman does and tried to solve the case? So I put this whole like detective board together today, and I had a lot of fun doing this. And also, this is just gonna be a cool thing to have in my room now because I don't know, it's neat. It's like I solved a mystery. But let me know if you guys think I'm right or not. And if you want more context about this story, definitely go read The Long Halloween. It is a great starting point for Batman. It's great if you aren't so familiar. You don't really need to be super familiar with any of the Batman characters or the world or the lore, because none of it is like really, in my opinion, none of it's like really like heavily assuming that you know a ton about Batman. But even if you are a big Batman fan, I think you'll really love what is being shown here because, in my opinion, it's just one of the best. It's so well done. Really great mystery, something that I want to see more of from Batman. And yeah, this video was hopefully pretty entertaining or at least interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed it. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you later.